Hello and welcome everyone. This is the Founder Scoop. My name is Jacob Lee, and today I have with me Eksayn Anderson. Thanks for coming, man.
Thanks so much, Jacob. Thanks for having me on the show. Appreciate it.
Yeah, absolutely. So everyone, Eksayn, he is a public speaker and an author, and he specializes in sales and influence training. So I'm really excited to hear about your story and kind of what things you've learned and how you can help others in those specialties that you mentioned.
Well, thanks, Jacob. Yeah, this will be exciting. Good chat.
So, Eksayn, tell me a little bit about you and kind of what got you started on this journey as an author and a public speaker.
Oh, great question. So I'll tell you this. I was driving one day and I just had a clear moment. And I think a lot of people have these kind of clear moments. Sometimes you call them promptings or clear moments, but I know I needed to go speak to people. And I didn't know what I was doing. I mean, I was actually, at the time I was selling homes. And so I, sold some homes, I have a real estate license. But I ended up doing a little research online, and I found that there's a thing called the National Speakers Association. I went down to the National Speakers Association. There was a very kind woman there who used to be Utah's Miss America. She was Utah's representative at the pageant. And she had done a lot of speaking. And I asked her, I said, I need to become a speaker. I kind of had this clear moment. And she said, well, I hear that a lot. And she goes, well, what do you know? And I said, well, I've sold some homes. And she said, well, you need to get some speeches under your belt that are paid. And so maybe what you could do is go down and get a real estate continuing education class at the Division of Real Estate and see if you can get people to pay you to speak, because you have to have a certain number of paid speeches at the time you did anyway to get into this. Okay. To the Speakers Association.
Is that association kind of like Toastmasters?
A little bit. It's a speakers association for people who are actually getting paid to speak. So you have Toastmasters, which is a great organization. I've been a part of that, and they help you learn to speak. And then kind of maybe the next step would be to go into the National Speakers Association, which is an association that helps people who are speaking more for a living or trying to.
Yeah.
And so I did. I went down to the Division of Real Estate. I turned in this class that I created, and they said it's okay. And I went and talked to a few associations, and I think the first association paid me $100 to go speak. And I thought, wow, I'm getting paid to speak. That's great. And eventually, through time, I ended up getting a 3-hour class, eventually a 4-hour class, a 6-hour class. And I went and got them approved in the different states. So it was approved in Utah. I got approved in Idaho, and eventually Wyoming and Nebraska and Texas and South Dakota, a bunch of other states. And I got some good experience on the stage, being actually able to talk to people, and so which is really valuable, right? To kind of learn where people laugh and cry and what resonates. And the same kind lady at the Speakers Association, she said, well, you're going to need to write a book at some point. And I had also sold to, I found, anyway, there was a time where I sold to businesses and governments, school districts and governments. And one of the things that was hard for when I first started out was like, how do you get to the right person? How do you get to a decision maker when you're trying to reach out to these big organizations? So I wrote a book, and I called it The Key to the Gate, and I just self-published it. But it was really neat because there was a lady on Forbes who decided to write an article, and she wrote the perfect article for me. She said, the gentleman who wrote this first-time author used the principles in his book to get through to me, a busy CEO who has a part-time gig writing for Forbes. And so
Awesome. Wow.
That Forbes article really helped me a lot because it, was featured on Forbes, and that allowed me to get a little interview with the TV station locally. And then that allowed me to reach out to people. And I had some people start calling me. I had a company that was selling, big Fortune 1000 company called me up and say, hey, can you come train our guys? And so I've been able to speak from Maine to California, even a little bit outside the country, and do that. So
that's awesome. That was amazing.
That was a blessing.
That's so cool. What did that feel like to make that transition in your career? Like, were you scared? Were you excited? Like, that's a pretty big transition.
Yeah. Now I was still doing other things, just so you know, like it wasn't like a complete jump from here to there, but But to be able to actually, I'll tell you, there is a satisfaction, Jacob, that comes when you can say, I created something, like I created this class or this speech or this whatever, and people pay you for it. I mean, when that happens, you think, wow, that's kind of neat. And it's a different feeling than, okay, I'm going to go to a job and they're going to tell me what to do and I'm going to kind of help build their business, which isn't a bad thing. I mean, we've all had to do that and it's a good thing, but there is something about creating something that you did and have people say, we'd like to pay you for that.
Yeah.
There is a satisfaction. So how was that? I'll say it was satisfying to say, I created a class that people actually like and they pay me for, which was great.
That's a good answer. Yeah. Did you ever expect to write a book, or is that also kind of a surprise?
Well, if you would have asked me when I was young, if I was going to write a book, I probably would have said no. I've wanted to be an astronaut. It's good, wanted to be. Yeah. Things have turned out a little different than when you're young, and maybe that's not a great thing. Maybe I can still be an astronaut. I'm still young enough. I could try, maybe. I don't know. But I'll tell you this, it is an interesting thing to write a book. I think most people have enough content. If they would just lock themselves in a room for 2 weeks, you could probably write a book.
Yeah. It takes a lot of discipline, though, and a lot of focus.
It took me longer than 2 weeks, yeah. It does take a little bit of focus. So good question.
That's awesome. So let's talk more then about kind of your area of expertise, right? You talk about how you are an influence and sales trainer. Where did that pivot come from?
Well, because most of my career has been in sales, so I've done a lot of different sales. I've sold to businesses, I've sold to associations, I've sold to governments, sold to consumers. So I've done door to door. I've done a bunch of sales, and so I've noticed that there are some things that worked and some things that really didn't work. And I've tried them and kind of found out through the school of hard knocks, if you will, what works and what doesn't work. Right.
Yeah.
And so over time, it's been a skill that I feel like I've become somewhat proficient at and been able to share my skills with others. So.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. That's cool. Where all did you sell? I mean, you have like a wide range of experience.
So I've sold to school districts throughout the United States. I've sold to governments, like local governments, like cities, towns, counties. And one of the things that was a problem when I first started out is, how do you get to the right person? Because here's the interesting thing. If you're going to sell to an organization, you can convince anybody you want to do something, but the problem is if they're not the decision maker, you're going to have a problem. You see what I'm saying? So you can sell to someone, they can say, hey, I love your product, but they may not be able to sign the contract and get you a check. And so I learned that pretty quickly on, that if you don't get to the decision maker, then you're not going to sell anything. And so that was one of the problems that made me want to write the book eventually, was just that I had kind of thought, how do I do this? And I had to kind of figure it out. And then once I did figure it out, I thought, maybe I could help people by getting a little bit of the help. That was what eventually helped me, get down that road a little more. But there are some things that are really just ancient, timeless principles. Maybe let me tell you a story. Can I tell you a story?
Yeah, please do.
So years ago, had a problem with my bank account. Guess what the problem was?
Was it pretty low?
Didn't have money in the account. Didn't put money in the account when I should have put money in the account. And I was a little embarrassed. I went down to the bank and tried to figure this problem out. And there was a gentleman there named, we'll call him Jeff, who helped me figure out this problem with my account. And when he was done, I looked at Jeff and I said, hey, Jeff, can I get the email to your boss? And he looked at me kind of funny, like, why do you want the email to my boss? And I said, well, I'm going to tell him what a great job you did. And by the way he reacted, I could tell this was not normal for him. He was a little bit surprising, but I got the email and I had his email in his car, and I went home that night and I wrote an email that probably took me a few minutes, but it said something like this. It said, dear Mr. Branch Manager, I had the opportunity of working with Jeff. He was very professional and helpful. I think he deserves a raise and a promotion. And it was a sincere compliment. And I sent the email to his boss and copied Jeff on it. And I didn't think anything else about it. It was really interesting. I went back to the bank maybe the next week or so, I don't remember. And this is back in the days when you had to go to the bank more than you do now. You could do a lot of it through your phone now. But back then you actually had to take paper checks to the bank and things. And I'm standing in line, and there's maybe 10 people in front of me in line. And something happened, Jacob, that had never happened to me before. As I was standing in line, somebody comes up to me and says, Mr. Anderson. And they knew my name. And I lived in a fairly big city at the time, decent sized city anyway. And so it wasn't normal that people would know your name sometimes. He said, Mr. Anderson. I said, yes. Kind of surprised. He said, can I help you with your banking? And I said, well, sure. I'm standing at the end of the line. He goes, follow me. So he took me from the end of the line, took me over to his desk and let me do my banking in front of everybody else. You would have thought I had $10 million at the bank, which we all know that I didn't. And it happened again and again where I was at this bank, and they would just treat me like a king. And the interesting thing, Jacob, is it didn't happen until I'd written this email to his boss.
Yeah.
Well, if you fast forward several years later, I'm sitting in this high-level director's office in New York, and he looks at me and he goes, you're the only salesperson I've ever let into my office. And I was surprised because competition was fierce for the things I was selling. And to be fair, he might have meant about the particular product I was selling, but that's not what he said. He said, you're the only sales guy I've let into my office. And then he said something that was really interesting. And I'll kind of ask him, like, what do you think I did to get in this guy's office? And I'll tell you, it was almost the exact same thing that happened at the bank. Okay, so I sent him an email, and I'll tell you what, he completely ignored the email, like most decision makers do. I sent this director an email, no answer, no response. There wasn't even an I'm not interested or somebody else handles this or anything. It was just a zero. And if, a few days, maybe several days later, it took us to call in and talk to him. And who did I run into? I ran into his secretary. And I said, hey, can I speak? We'll call him Bob. I said, can I speak with Bob? And she said, he's unavailable. And that's what they always say, by the way. Yeah. And I said, well, maybe what I could do is just resend that email, the email that I sent before, and copy it to you. Is that okay? And she said, sure. And she said it in this kind of nice, bubbly way. Like you could, I don't know if you ever heard anybody who you can almost hear them smiling. You ever talked on how? Well, she was one of those people who you could hear her smiling. And I said, and she was just kind of bubbly. And we started talking a little bit as I was pulling this email up. And as we were talking just for a second, I noticed that she was that kind of bubbly, friendly, courteous personality. And I said, thanks for being so courteous and friendly, professional. I appreciate it. I'm on the phone all day long. It's awesome. Thank you. And that was a sincere compliment. Yeah. And she said, well, thanks. I said, and as I was pulling the email up, I said, you know what? I'm going to mention that to your boss. And she was a little bit surprised. You could tell something in her voice. But while she was on the phone right there, I pulled up the email and I said something like this. Dear Bob, I had the opportunity of speaking with Janice. She was very professional and courteous. I think she deserves it. I mean, I didn't say it. I said, I think she's an asset to your team. I think I said something like that. So I sent the email to her boss and I copied her on it. And I said, hey, did that email come through? There was a little pause. And she said, let me check. She goes, yeah, it came through. And I said, and she goes, and then she said, there was another little pause. And she said, thanks for the compliment. And I said, well, I meant it. Thanks for being so friendly, courteous. That was it. The conversation ended shortly after that. Well, fast forward back, I'm in this high-level director's office in New York, and he looks at me and he goes, he just barely said, you're the only salesperson I let in my office. And this is what he said next. He said, the reason you're here is because you were nice to my secretary. He said, I talked to my secretary more than I talked to my wife. And some of these guys don't understand that. Let me tell you what he did not say, Jacob. He did not say, you have the best social media I've ever seen, so I had to, I've never seen somebody tweet 1 million times in a day, and you did. He didn't say that. He didn't say, you've got a great looking website, or your marketing was awesome. He just said, you're the only guy I've let in my office because you were nice to my secretary. And that hit me because it wasn't something I did with technology. It wasn't some kind of new technique. It was something ancient and timeless. Really what it was is just the golden rule. Just treating people like you want to be treated. Be the first to do it. Yeah. Well, when you do that in business, when you do that with your children, when you do that with your spouse, when you say, I'm going to try to do something nice that's unexpected for someone, it really does come back. I mean, that secretary, she got me in. It wasn't, let me tell you this, it wasn't his CEO buddy or his golfing buddy or the senator or the president of the United States. It was like what some people would consider low level, just treating people nice. And here's the thing I found is that the gatekeepers, who a lot of people try to run over, they try to push through them, and now who are you and what is your title, act indignant. Don't do that. Treat everybody like gold. Anyway.
That's a great story. Thank you for sharing. I think what I find super fascinating about business is that so often it's a reflection of your character. And it gives you the opportunity to really focus in on yourself. If you're paying attention, you'll notice aspects of yourself, and you have the opportunity to continue being like that, or you can change.
That's profound, Jacob. You know that. I like that you said that.
Thanks.
That's really profound.
Yeah. I only have a little bit of experience in business, but that's definitely one of the lessons I've learned, and something that gets me excited to continue this.
Yeah, I think that's a really profound thought. Thanks for sharing that.
Yeah. Well, what other principles do you talk about in your book?
The principle of the golden rule is huge. I mean, that's it's an ancient, timeless principle, right? And it's not rocket science, but when you're the first to do something nice or kind and in a way that nobody expects. Let me give you an example. Let's talk about this. So in life, we have what are called expectations. We expect something. But what happens a lot of times is reality comes in lower. I expect a certain level of customer service, and maybe I didn't get it. Or I expect something out of a relationship and I'm not getting it. Or I expect something here. Well, what's the distance between these two things called? My expectations here and my realities here. I call this distance frustration. Okay, so I expect something, but I'm not getting it. Well, I'm frustrated. And if you do business like that, where you say, hey, I'm gonna lead you to believe you're gonna get this, but you really only get this. You have frustrated clients, frustrated customers, frustrated employees, frustrated spouse, frustrated children. And so people who are able to keep the lines together, so this is what I say I'm going to do and this is what I'm doing, that to eliminate the frustration. Well, here's the kicker. If you can actually flip the lines, if you can make it so that people's reality is better than they expect, now this distance between them is not frustration. Now it's delight, it's referrals, it's increased business, because you get a reputation for you exceeded someone's expectation. And I think that's what I didn't know I was doing it at the time, but there was like think about Janice in New York. She probably screens out a lot of salespeople. Some of them are rude and kind of like pushy and try to, who are you and what is your title, which that ignores the golden rule, which you don't want. Some of them might just be, different. And I didn't know I was doing it at the time. Like, I'm not like a smart genius at anything, but I'm saying that for some reason I stumbled into it. And I thought about it years later, actually, right? Like, what really happened is her experience, she had a compliment to her boss about something that was important to her, which made her reality a little bit better than she expected. Do you see what I'm saying? So instead of just being a normal someone she has to screen out, and I, like I said, I wasn't trying to do that, but it made her reality better than she expected. So now she was delighted rather than frustrated.
Yeah.
And she was the one who held the key to the gate and got me in. Right. And so, I think if we can do that in business, and in our families and with our relationships that are important, if we can say, how can I make people's reality better than they expect? And do it in a way that surprises. And there's even some research that shows if you surprise people, the ability they just associate good things with you. And that's what we're trying to do. And when I say trying to associate, we're trying to do good in the world. It's not so we can manipulate people. It's because we're trying to become the kind of people, hit the mic here. We're trying to become the kind of people who naturally see the good in others, naturally try to do good in the world. And when that happens, I think other things naturally come back.
That's awesome. I think that is also pretty profound, Dar. And it's very simple.
Yeah. Well, yeah, it's just simple. So it's not rocket science. Everyone thinks you have to have some magic formula. And I think, you know what? The real success in life, I think, comes from the ancient, timeless stuff more than it does with the newest. There's a lot of people who want to sell you and say, if you just buy this program, you'll have magical overnight success. And that's just not true. Like, I think more appropriate would be like, hey, what are the timeless ancient principles that are going to make it so that you kind of have to remind people, instead of saying there's this new gadget, this new thing, this new social media, something that's going to rocket you to success. And I think maybe we need to look at the timeless ancient stuff more than the newest fad, the newest program, the newest something.
Yeah. Yeah. That's awesome. I would totally agree. Like, especially just the way that you demonstrated that in your work and in your story. And like, it's something that we need more in the world for sure.
Well, I think I agree with you. I think, the law of the harvest, there's a principle we could talk about really quick here. The law of the harvest, which is a farmer's law. Okay. The law of the harvest basically says if you plant your seeds and you water them and you weed them and you take care of them, that later on you get a harvest, right? Well, there's a lot of people who want to come in and say, oh, you don't need to do that. You can jump, you can parachute in and instant success. And that's just not how the world operates. One time I spoke to a group of, there was a bunch of farmers, I think it was in South Dakota, and I asked them, can you cheat the law of the harvest? Can you cram for the law of the harvest? And they laughed at me. I'm like, no. I mean, imagine thinking this. Imagine being a farmer and you plant your seeds in the spring and you take care of them. And then there's another farmer who doesn't do anything. And in September, when he's like, oh, I didn't plant. I didn't do anything. I'm going to plant some seeds and cram for the harvest, right? Is that going to work? It doesn't work, And so I think instead of looking for the instantaneous quick fix, sunshine formulas, we really need to go back to the ancient stuff and say, no, we reap what we sow.
Yeah.
The law of work and you can work smart, obviously, and use technology. I'm not against any of that. What I'm saying is like the timeless ancient principles are more important than the new techniques.
Yeah. I think what's interesting about the example you gave there is like it is the physical world that teaches those principles, right?
Yeah.
Like as a farmer, that's like how the world works. You cannot change that. And if you're paying attention, you're able to learn that principle just from nature.
That's exactly right. Yeah. I mean, it's just there. It's like, let me give you one more example, like gravity. Gravity is a principle, right? And it's real, whether you believe it is or not. Would you agree?
Yes.
Yeah. So, you've got gravity. Gravity works here. It works where it's keeping us both sitting here. It works on the other side of the world. It works on every continent. Gravity works. Gravity even works out of space. It keeps the moon going around the Earth, keeps the Earth going around the sun. Millions of miles away, there's clusters of galaxies held together by gravities everywhere. And when you come in contact with any principle, you have a couple of options. You can either align with it or you can ignore it to your peril. And so I'll ask some people, I'll say, well, how could you align with gravity if you say you wanted to make money? And these are the answers I hear, Jacob. I hear answers like, well, you could build a hydroelectric dam or a ski resort. You could, do a skydiving company or water slides or something, zip line. Well, if you respect gravity, gravity could make you wealthy with a ski resort or hydroelectric dam selling millions of dollars of electricity. But what if you don't respect gravity and you decide to just ignore it and you fall off a cliff? Well, you could get injured, maybe even die, right? So gravity is this force in the universe that's bigger than me, it's bigger than you, it's bigger than everybody. And we have a choice. We can either respect it and use it to our advantage and align with it, or we can ignore it to our peril. Well, here's the thing. In business and life, there are principles that are just as real as gravity. Like just as real. And there are things like we just talked about, like the golden rule. Like what if I had gone to the bank and I said, I can't believe you messed up my account, or I made this mistake. You better fix my problem. If you don't fix it, then I'm going to tell everybody what a bad bank you are, and I'm going to put a bad review. Could I have gotten my problem fixed? The answer is maybe. They might have fixed my problem. But what would have happened when I came to the bank a week later, several days later? What would have happened? They probably would have been like, watch out for that guy. He's a little bit of a time bomb. By the way, make him wait longer because he's a little bit of a jerk. You see, you might be able to cheat a principle in the short run. In the long run, though, you're hosed.
Yeah.
Right.
Now, you've got a podcast called The Principle Podcast. Are these things that you talk about on your podcast?
Yeah, we try to. We try to talk about the principles that govern our consequences. because because Jacob, you and I can do anything we want, but the truth is we don't control the consequence. The consequence is controlled by principles. I can go to the edge of a cliff and say, I believe I can fly and I can jump off, and the principle of gravity still controls my consequence. When I'm interacting with people, if I'm honest, if I keep my word, they trust me. That controls my consequence. If I don't, then I don't have trust. If I ignore the golden rule, it's like falling off a cliff. If I ignore honesty, it's like falling off a cliff. If I ignore the law of the harvest, it's like falling off a cliff. Whereas if I align with it, so yes, we do explore that event on the Principle podcast.
That's awesome. Well, Eksayn, I've really enjoyed this time to chat with you. Thank you for sharing all these stories. Where can people go to learn more about you and what you do?
Thanks for asking. They could go to EKS Influence, which is my business site. They could also, we're starting a movement for fathers, because we know one of the fundamental things that you really need in our worldwide house is good parents, good marriage, good families, fathers. You could also go to dadfluence.org. Some of us like the word influence, but dadfluence.org. EKSinfluence.com or dadfluence.org.
Well, what would you say is like the biggest lesson that you've learned so far in your careers?
Probably just what we talked about. The biggest lesson, probably just that our consequences are determined by principles. If we can align with them, we get good results, good consequences. And if we don't, we get less than desirable results. And I've seen both. So some of it I've had to learn the hard way, and some of it I've had to learn. Hopefully make good choices.
Oh, no. Well, I appreciate your time. Thank you for joining me today.
Jacob, such an honor to be on your show. Thank you for having me.